This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. I would get dropped off at around 3 p.m. and my parents would be home around 4:30, so not that big of a deal. Today, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, around 7, and my mom, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even be that dark until like 8:30. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got on my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. Today, it was just me and my friend Seth. I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. No one should have been there until like 7 p.m. My house is set up so that my upstairs has windows that look over my driveway. So with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than expected. I looked outside. It was a red truck. Nobody that I know drives a red truck. The person pulled into the middle of the driveway sideways, like he owned the place. When I looked out the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so no one should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to my front door. I thought maybe it was one of my dad's friends or somebody my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if someone was going to be coming over. Soon after, I hear a knock at the door, then another. I go to my other window that has a better view of the walkway up to my front door. I see the guy walking back down the walkway. I switch and go back to looking through the windows overlooking my driveway. I'm relaying all of this to Seth, still with my mic on. I tell Seth that he's walking back to his truck now. Instead, he walks past his truck and tries to open my garage side door. At this point, my heart sinks. I tell Seth that this guy just tried to get into my house. Mind you, it is literally broad daylight at like 5 p.m. Luckily, it was locked because sometimes we forget to lock it. After he tried the door, he started walking to my back patio. I dropped my headset and I quietly ran downstairs to see what he is doing. I get downstairs and stand behind the wall so I'm not visible from the back door or living room windows. I just listen. I hear him try to open the door. Then I hear a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross my living room to get there, and you'd be able to see me if I went in there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner and he was gone. I ran back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I'm telling him this, I hear a car door shut. This time when I look out the window, he finally gets in his truck. I looked at the truck closer, and I noticed the only thing he had in his truck bed was a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes. During this time, Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate. He was parked where I couldn't see him. Then he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I get to the back door and see that the doormat was moved. Both big plant pots had been moved as well. He was looking for a key. We have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch and all the pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I would have done if he was able to find the key or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. The guy never came back. About 3 days ago, when my mother had left to meet my grandparents who lived abroad, my brother decided to celebrate his summer freedom by going to a local market and picking up a number of bootleg games for our PlayStation 2. We'd had the console equipped with a chip that enabled us to play fake games since the originals were far too expensive to keep buying. That night, we decided to sit down and play one of the games. It was supposed to be a copy of Silent Hill 2, but when we popped the CD into the console, we realized that it was actually a regular DVD with some videos on it. My brother and I, along with a friend of ours who was present, decided to watch the first video and see how entertaining it was. with a resolution that in the morning the DVD would be taken back to the guy who sold it to my brother in the first place. The first video was a 10-minute shot of a secluded road. It seemed to be extremely late, and in the shot there was a pair of young women. They seemed a bit tipsy, and the camera followed them at a distance as they walked around the neighborhood and then finally into a building. The next clip was more unnerving than the last. Two hands were using a lock-picking set to try and open a door. All three of us watching inhaled sharply as the lock clicked and the door swung open. There was an unsettling silence as the camera person slid into the house quietly. As the camera panned to record the living room, the person behind the camera began to pant heavily. They then began to make their way into the house. Having found the bedroom, they walked inside, still breathing heavily, then zoomed in on the sleeping woman's face. We recognized her as one of the tipsy women from the earlier video. A hand bearing a knife suddenly appeared on the screen and began caressing the sleeping woman's cheek with a knife. The other hand pulled the covers back and started to grope the woman. The knife slowly slid down from the woman's cheek to her throat. All this time, the camera person was breathing heavily. Then the video ended. There were more videos of women being followed and then of houses being broken into. We guessed that the houses were probably those of the women that the voyeur had been following. We watched all of them, getting more and more freaked out, until I realized the woman being followed in the last video was my mother. Judging by her clothes, it had been shot a few days ago, probably the very day she had left for the airport. I began to panic. There was still lots of space on the DVD, which meant that if the voyeur had broken into my house, the evidence would have been on the disc. My mother had been gone for only 2 days, and I was so shaken that I asked my brother's friends if my brother and I could stay at his house. He readily agreed. The next morning, the three of us returned to my apartment filled with apprehension. The lock did not appear to have been tampered with, and I had to unlock the door to enter. The house looked exactly as we had left it last night, scattered crisp packets and all. I was about to heave a sigh of relief before I saw the message above my bed. In what appeared to be blood, somebody had written in capital letters, "It pains me that both the ladies of this house have denied me an audience. It pains me so much that I bleed." I called the police immediately, but upon arrival, they concluded that the blood was some scarlet nail polish that had been taken from my dresser and tried to brush it off as a prank played on me by my brother and his friends. "Boys will be boys," said the female officer to me before she left. But I was so disturbed that I decided to stay at my brother's friend's house till my mother got home. However, I decided to take the DVD with me as proof and to set up an old laptop in my bedroom that had a webcam, linking it to my personal laptop with Log Me In so I could see if anyone broke in again. Log Me In lets me remotely access any laptop I sync with my regular laptop. I can see the desktop of that computer and use any other programs, including the webcam. This evening, as I was accessing my laptop and watching the webcam feed, I saw a shadow on one of the walls. Then a new window popped up, indicating that somebody was using the laptop simultaneously and had inserted a flash drive into one of the USB ports. I tried to shut the laptop down, but the other person using it opened Windows Explorer to play a movie file on the flash drive. The video was of me walking from my house into my brother's friend's bungalow with my luggage. All of a sudden, the video player was minimized, and in the webcam feed, I could see another message beneath the first one above my head. It read, "You dare to keep what is mine? I shall come to claim something of yours in exchange. You will bleed like me." Tonight, my brother's friend's parents are out at a dinner party. I can hear the front door clicking open, which is strange because my brother and his friend are sound asleep on the second floor of the bungalow. Edit. I have locked myself in an upstairs bedroom with my brother and his friend. The psycho is in my room. I can hear his shuffling. He's cut the phone lines, but we've called the police using my brother's cell phone. I have the DVD with me. I don't know if I should just throw it away. I feel like the police should see it, but then we get caught for buying the counterfeit games. What the heck should I do? Second edit. Can't say much, but the good news is that the cops are here at my friend's house and we all have to go to the station. The bad news is that the DVD broke. I'll try to post something soon. This happened last summer when I was 19. It was a Friday afternoon and I had the day off work. I lived with my girlfriend in a small duplex outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. We moved in just a few months earlier and didn't know many of our neighbors yet. She was working a long shift that day, so I had the house to myself. Around 1 p.m., I was sitting at my desk in the living room, trying to finish an online course for work when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a light, polite knock, it was the kind where each thud rattles the wood. I assumed it was a delivery driver because we order stuff all the time. When I opened the door though, there was no truck or van in sight, just a man standing on the porch holding a medium-sized cardboard box. He looked maybe in his mid-40s, scruffy, wearing jeans and a faded orange polo. No uniform, no logo on the box, no clipboard, nothing official about him. Delivery for, he squinted at the label. Logan Miller? That's me, I said, though something about his hesitation threw me off. He handed me the box quickly, then nodded and walked off down the street instead of to a vehicle. I remember watching him until he turned the corner and disappeared behind another house. I stood there for a second, uneasy. The box didn't have a shipping label or any kind of branding, just my name written in black marker. No address, no return, nothing. I took it inside anyway and set it on the kitchen counter. It wasn't heavy, maybe just a couple of pounds at most. My curiosity won over my suspicion, so I grabbed a knife and cut it open. Inside was a single Polaroid picture. It was a photo of me standing in the driveway, taken just seconds before I'd opened the door. I remember staring at it for a solid minute, my hands starting to shake. Then I grabbed my phone and went out front, scanning the street. There was nobody around. The neighborhood was quiet, with just the sound of cicadas in the trees. I called my girlfriend right away. She told me to lock the doors and call the police. I felt dumb doing it, like maybe it was just some stupid prank, but I called anyway. The officer who came by looked at the photo, looked around the porch, and basically told me the same thing. Probably a prank. You'd be surprised what bored teenagers get up to, he said. He took the picture, filled out a quick report, and left. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't focus on anything the rest of the day. I double-checked every window, every lock. By the time it got dark, I'd calmed down a little. My girlfriend got home around 8, and I told her everything again. She thought it was creepy, but agreed with the cop. Probably some local kid trying to freak people out. That night, I set the box outside in the trash and went to bed. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a soft thump. It came from the porch. I sat up and listened, heart pounding. Another thump. This one louder, followed by the faint sound of footsteps on the wood. I grabbed my phone, opened the blinds just a crack, and looked out. There on the porch was another box. I could barely make out a figure walking down the street again. Same build and same weird pace. I didn't go outside. I called 911 immediately and told the dispatcher what was happening. She said that an officer was on the way and told me not to open the door. The minutes felt like hours. I just stood there watching through the blinds, waiting. By the time the police arrived, the man was long gone again. This time though, the box was bigger. The officer, a different guy this time, opened it outside with gloves. Inside were more Polaroids, maybe a dozen of them. Each one of them showed the outside of our house, different angles. Some from the backyard, and the last one, taken through our living room window, showed me sitting on the couch. That was the moment the officer's tone changed. He told us to pack a bag and spend the night somewhere else. We drove to my girlfriend's parents' place and stayed there for a few days. While we were gone, police increased patrols around the neighborhood. They told us they'd check the footage from the nearby doorbell cameras. A few days later, I got a call from the detective assigned to the case. He asked if I'd noticed anyone doing lawn or pest control recently, anybody with access to yards or fences. Apparently, one of the neighbors a few streets over had reported a man pretending to work for a pest control company. He'd been knocking on doors asking about recent rat sightings, taking photos around homes, then leaving without ever doing anything. They suspected it might be the same person. A week later, they called again, and they finally caught him. He was a 47-year-old man named Raymond, a former maintenance worker who'd been fired from another rental company months before. According to the detective, he'd been breaking into homes around the area, not to steal but to leave small gifts, photos, trinkets, random items as part of some kind of obsession. When they searched his van, they found dozens of boxes, each labeled with addresses of homes in our neighborhood, including ours. And in one of the boxes was another stack of Polaroids. The most recent ones were of me and my girlfriend sleeping in our bed. They never found out how we got those shots. None of those windows were tampered with, and the doors had stayed locked. The detective said the guy had an older master key, set used for maintenance work years ago, and some of the locks in the neighborhood were never changed. We moved out less than a month later. I still don't know how long he'd been watching us, or how many nights he'd been close enough to take those photos without us hearing a thing. Now, every time I see a plain cardboard box on somebody's porch, I feel that same chill run down my spine. Because the scariest part isn't that he took pictures, it's that he handed one to me personally, and I didn't even realize until it was too late. My mom was on her routine night shift at the hospital, and I knew I wouldn't see her till the next morning, probably in a deep sleep or her bed, likely still in her uniform. I always made her breakfast before I would leave for school in the morning so she could wake up to a nice meal. I use the word nice loosely. It's the best I could do considering I'm 16 and failed my home economics class last year. But my mom never minded the toast, scrambled eggs, and turkey bacon platter left on her nightstand. We had said our goodbyes around 10:15 and I got myself comfortable on the couch with my dog to watch some TV. I turned the lights off over us to set the scene and make it feel more immersive. I had gotten through one Dateline episode when I decided that I could enjoy the experience a little more if I grabbed my bong. So I went upstairs and down the long narrow hallway that led to my wing of the house. I was the only occupied room on this side of the house. The other rooms were my dad's old office and the guest room, though that room hasn't had a guest in it for years. Ever since my dad's passing, my mom and I haven't wanted to host other people here. Instead, it hosts the overload of clutter I find at the end of every school year. Clothes that I no longer want and plan on selling or donating. Paintings I worked months on but never hung up, and other miscellaneous items that aren't used but can't seem to be let go of either. I opened my bedroom door and grabbed the piece off my nightstand. It was almost a sculpture rather than the cheesy bong you might imagine when thinking of a stoner. It was about 16 inches tall and made completely out of this blue hand-blown glass that resembled the color the ocean looks after a series of rough waves. The glass swirled in an upward motion towards the mouthpiece that made it look like it was water frozen in time. My favorite feature of this prized possession is its ability to glow in the dark. After letting it sit in the sun for a bit, flecks in the glass would glow a bright green at night. I walked back down the hallway with it, then back down the stairs until I was sitting down on the couch next to my dog, Pepe. He was sound asleep as I started to grind up the green sticky plant matter, which was genuinely what the name was, plant matter. It was this new strain I had just bought from my regular plug from the next town over. He had told me he just recently got a limited supply of this stuff and asked me if I could be one of his test subjects to see if he should buy more. Without hesitation, I agreed. Discounted weed just to give my feedback. I'd be a fool not to take that offer, so I did. Holding it in my hand, I saw a multitude of colors that reflected off its crystals. It's common to see colors like purple and orange, but this stuff had shades of red, blue, and pink. Odd, I thought. But I was taken over by more intrigue than suspicion, so I continued to put some in the bowl and pack it down with my lighter. After the first inhale, I got the taste of ordinary weed, but it was soon followed by a slight trace of citrus. It was pleasant. I was paying extra attention to the experience so I could give a good detailed report back to the plug, like he had asked. About 15 minutes went by. Dateline was still playing and the specific episode seemed to be extra interesting to me in my new hazy state. The cushions beneath me started to almost mold to my body. I felt as though I was sinking, yet weighed as light as a feather at the same time. My eyes started to get dry and trying to keep them open became more of a task than a natural ability at this point. As I slowly started to move my eyes behind my lids, I realized that I had fallen asleep. It must have been for quite a while because I felt so sluggish, like it used all the strength within me just to be able to fully open my eyes. The lights above the living room were still off, like I had left them, but all the others on the downstairs floor were too. Something I had not done. It was now pitch black everywhere except for the surrounding area where the light emitting from the TV could reach, which was not very far. The second thing I noticed was what sent a cold chill running through my body and caused my heart to stop momentarily. I was paralyzed. I was physically unable to move any part of my body other than my eyes, tips of fingers, and toes. I was only able to produce slight twitches, but it took so much strength out of me to do so. There I was, almost completely paralyzed, unable to move or scream for help while the TV continued the program like I was still an attentive, consenting viewer. Pepe was still sleeping soundly beside me, blissfully unaware of the living hell I was experiencing, just inches away from his sleeping little head. I tried reaching for him. Maybe he would wake up and sense my distress, and then what? I thought to myself. What the heck could happen next that would possibly help me in the situation? The answer was nothing. I felt as though Keith Morrison was now mocking me, and the couch cushion below that once felt made for me, was now stiff and cold, as if every fiber in the fabric was rejecting contact with my body. I reasonably started to panic, not because the realization of my situation was settling in, but because I heard a creak from upstairs. I knew this house like the back of my hand. It's the only house I have ever lived in, so I knew that each floorboard had its own distinct creak. And this one I recognized as the top of the stairs. Somebody was in my home, and they were standing at the top of the staircase that led directly to the room I was in. Each crack that followed the last made my eyes water. The fear I felt distorted each sound to resemble what I might imagine a rib being snapped in half would make. Hearing the footsteps slowly descend the stairs made my stomach turn and my body want to writhe in pain from the inside out. Staring at the one visible stair from my position on the couch made me want to retreat backwards and find security in the couch. I did not want to see the intruder, the person who would be able to have their way with me in such a vulnerable state. But I could not rip my eyes from the stairs. I knew danger was coming, but I just couldn't look away. If somebody was going to do whatever evil they intended, I was going to see it, approaching, whether or not I truly wanted to. Seconds felt like minutes. My heart raced so fast that each beat felt moments apart. I was dripping in sweat, even though my body couldn't move. The sound from the TV gradually faded away and was replaced with a long piercing ringing in its place. The creaks that belonged to the stairs near me echoed as the unidentified subject's weight pressed down on them. Through the dim lighting, I made out what seemed to be a shadowed hand gripping the side of the wall that obstructed my view of the stairs and the person on them. What broke the moment of silence was the faint muffled scream coming from the back of my throat. It was the only amount of sound I could muster up in my frozen state. I was a deer in headlights, the perfect victim for any predator. It was hard to say whether I was still paralyzed or if it was the sheer terror I felt in that moment that was responsible for my immobilization. The hand methodically lifted its fingers and slowly tapped each one of them back down, creating a sickening drumming sound. One, then twice, then 3 times the lone hand strums before the rest of the body became slightly illuminated when it moved to the last and final stair. As its entire form was revealed, my wide eyes trailed up to about 8 feet in the air. It was gigantic. Its arms were as long as its height, and the creature's face had a mouth that stretched from side to side. It wore a gut-wrenching expression that could only be described as a smile, due to the fact that it had no teeth. Just a huge mouth stretched agape with bleeding gums that dripped down to my wood floors. To me, it was an indication that this was not a figment of imagination, but a real dangerous threat, and I needed to step into action immediately. The thing let me soak in its disgusting appearance fully so that its next performance was all the more terrifying. It produced a series of guttural, horrid sounds that could only be described as its laugh. It witnessed me using every ounce of energy I had in my body to just cry out or move, finding amusement in my distress. All I could do was cry silently. My eyes streamed with tears while I stared unblinking at the creature that slowly approached me like a lion would its wounded prey. It was just feet away now. Its long arms dangled behind its moving legs, dragging along the floor, still drumming its fingers to that nightmarish beat. The creature moved at a slow pace, taking advantage of my paralysis. It knew that dragging out this hellish scene would make the kill all the more satisfying for its demented desire. At this short distance, I was able to see its face fully illuminated now, and it was awful. Still smiling with its red gums, its small eyes were as red as its anatomy allowed, and their gaze never left mine. It had a nose, but it was just 2 holes that looked like they were hand-poked by whoever created this awful thing. It was almost as if it were human, but the devil seemed to have poisoned this one. It was now close enough to smell my fear and see the glint of hope for survival fading in my eyes. I had to do something. Anything that would make me feel like I at least tried to fight for my life. That's when I saw it in the corner of my eye. This faint green glow is just inches away from my frozen hand. My bong. Amongst all the chaos, I forgot about it, but something within me screamed at me to try to move again. So I did. I focused all of my energy toward moving my hand to grab my newly chosen weapon. And by luck only created by a miracle, it worked. I was able to grab it, and within moments, I had swung the thick glass over the creature's head, again and again and again. Its blood wasn't red like the color dripping from its toothless smile. Instead, it was dark black. The tar-like goo was everywhere. I felt it hit my face and go into my mouth. I saw it cover the couch, floors, and walls. The scene was brutal. The once terrifying creature was now smashed and bent into a multitude of ways, now left somewhere between the state of solid and liquid. Its face was no longer distinguishable from the other battered parts of its body, and I smiled. I smiled now that the thing no longer had his. I stood over its body with a mix of shock, adrenaline, and morbid joy that I would have almost laughed if it were not for my intense panting. I could not stop breathing, gasping for air as a rush of blood flowed to my brain. I awoke to the comforting feeling of bed sheets and a pillow under my head. The relief that this was all a dream showered over my body as I slowly opened my eyes and went to stretch my limbs. But I couldn't. My arms were prevented from moving further than at my hips. The sound of metal hitting against itself brought my attention to the handcuffs around my wrists that were connected to the bed's rails. Then, the slow and continuous beeping that was once hidden in the background got drawn forward as I began to scan my surroundings. I was in a hospital room, still covered in that sticky metallic-smelling substance. Though it was not a deep black like I previously witnessed, but crimson red. The unfamiliar voice of a man brought me to the present and out of the fog. "Miss," the officer started in a low and careful tone. "Do you remember anything from last night?" The question made my face turn to an almost offended expression after a second of recollection. Of course I did. I don't think I will ever be able to scratch that disgusting smile out of my memory. The immense fear I felt can still be there if I just close my eyes. Yes, it was the first time I heard my own voice in hours. There was this thing. The officer gave an unassumed look to his colleague as he let out a deep breath and laid a stack of images on my lap. My mother lay violently killed on our living room floor. If it weren't for her nursing uniform, I wouldn't have been able to tell that it was even human due to the unnatural state of anatomy she was in. Before I was able to even process what the officers were insinuating, I screamed. I screamed so loud that I felt my dry vocal cords rubbing against each other and let out a flood of tears that assisted the sobs of confusion, sadness, and anger. Out of my harsh cries, I recognized a hauntingly familiar sound. I looked up to see the officer drumming his fingers on his notepad and watched as his mouth started to stretch into that distinct, disgusting, and unforgettable toothless smile.
I was on a road trip from basically the East Coast to the West Coast. I had plans to meet up with some friends, but was also taking the road trip just for fun. I'd only ever flown to individual cities in the West, so I was excited to check out or at least drive through some of the other areas. I had the whole route planned, but on my third day of driving, I entered a part of the highway that was under heavy construction. My maps told me there was a road closure ahead, and directed me to get off the highway and onto a small one-lane road that went right along the highway. Now, right away, I did notice that no other cars seemed to get off when I did. They all were turning and going a different way. However, I figured it was just that they were all headed in a different direction. Maybe there was a big city that way or something. I didn't know because I didn't know the area. I wasn't worried about it, because my maps told me to go this way, and it was pretty much just going right along the highway anyways. Only difference was it was a smaller road and a lower speed limit. I think I got on this road around 7, so it was already dark. I should mention this trip was just toward the beginning of winter, and it was snowing a bit during this part of the road trip. Anyway, as I got further and further down this road, I only became more aware of just how empty it was, and eventually it veered away from the main highway and out into what looked like nothing. I had no idea where it was leading me, but my maps said I was still going the right way, and the estimated time to arrive at my destination looked normal, so I figured I was still good. After an hour at least, I saw a cluster of lights in the distance. Looked like a small town, which was great because I was running low on gas. Few minutes later, I was close enough to see that this cluster of lights really was only maybe 15 to 20 buildings. None of them had anything more than a couple of small outdoor lights on. The small town looked very old and run down, and honestly deserted. Sure, there were some lights on, but it still felt off. I drove up to the gas station, just some small vacant building on the edge of the town. There was a flickering light on the overhang, and the pump seemed to be working, so I got out and started filling the tank. Oddly, there was actually another car at the gas station. It was a small grayish SUV, parked at the pump across from me. Its windows weren't tinted or anything, so I could clearly see through them. Looked like there was a bunch of stuff packed in it, suitcases and whatnot, looking like they too were on a road trip. But nobody was inside of it, and nobody was outside of the car either. Wasn't sure where they were, because the gas station building was clearly closed, and this SUV definitely didn't belong to this town. It looked like they were just passing through. I started to feel a little more uncomfortable. The town had this really eerie feeling to it. It was also real quiet out there. The dead silence gave me shivers every time I looked out at the darkness and the empty streets. To make things worse, the gas was filling up extremely slow. Took a whole minute just for a single gallon, which probably wasn't even enough to get over to the next town, wherever the hell that was. And I think it was after being there for 2 minutes, waiting in the dark silence, that there was a sudden scream in the distance. It was a male voice screaming for help. I was so on edge already that it made me jump back and slam my shoulder against the gas pump. I stared out in the direction it came from, but it was a complete blackout. There was something about the voice that didn't feel right. I took a few steps away from my car just to get a clearer view of the area. Then the man yelled again. He was way closer this time, like somewhere in the dark right outside of the gas station. I looked out there for just about 20 seconds, listening to the eerie silence that followed his voice, before sudden movement in the side of my view caught my attention. It looked like someone running through the dark toward the back of the gas station, and almost as soon as I saw that, something else moved in another part of the dark. I felt like I was going insane, and my gut told me to get the hell out of this town immediately. I quickly started taking the pump out. As I did, I could hear multiple people running around in the grass just outside of the gas station. I hurried into my car, and that's when several guys came out of the dark, clearly all coordinated in whatever plan they had. They began sprinting toward me just as I got it into drive. I sped out of there and straight back onto the deserted road. I keep thinking about that empty car that was there, seeming to be on a road trip just like I was, probably getting there just a few minutes before I did. Was the person calling out for help in the dark attacked by the same men I saw? Or maybe the person calling out for help is what lured the other driver out there, only for who knows what to happen. There wasn't even a police station at that town, so although I reported the situation, I have no idea if they even drove out there to look. I never got any updates on what really happened at that town. Last November, I took a road trip out to my family's home for Thanksgiving. I lived around 20 hours away, which in road trip time is about 3 days of driving comfortably, and 2 days if really pushing it. This drive I'd done before, and hated it every time because of how incredibly boring most of it was. My parents lived on a small ranch that to me felt like the middle of nowhere, so a big portion of the drive was through nothing, either just plain open fields or vast untouched forests. After hours and hours of the same scenery, it always got painfully boring. The first half of the drive from leaving my city was always alright though. It was on the typical highways that mostly everyone takes if they were headed to or from a major city. However, it was toward the end of my second day of driving that I merged off of that highway and onto, I guess you'd call, a side road. It was still a highway, but only one lane, and way less people drove on it, not truckers or anything. And it really only led out to smaller, less distinguished towns. I made it to this part around 7 or 8 in the afternoon, so I wasn't planning to drive too much longer. I hoped there would be a town I could pull off in that had a motel or something. I drove another 2-ish hours. The road was completely dark and empty, just my headlights lighting up the way through the fog. I hadn't seen a single place to pull off and sleep at, so eventually when I found a small gas station, I figured it was better than nothing and pulled in. Now this gas station looked extremely old. It looked like it was just some sort of family-owned place in the middle of nothing. I didn't see a single light in the distance of any sort of town or even houses. However, the gas station's lights were on, and I was able to use the pump to top off my tank. Afterward, I parked in a spot on the side of the building and headed inside to ask if I could sleep for a few hours in their parking lot. When I walked in, a single guy was standing behind the counter, looked maybe 50, and was taken aback by me walking in. Guess customers don't usually stop by this late. I asked him if I could park for a couple hours. He mentioned right away that the station was closing in 15 minutes, and he would be leaving, but that if I was comfortable staying at the empty place overnight, then he didn't mind. I thanked him and bought a couple energy drinks for tomorrow, then headed back out to my car. But I replayed the conversation in my head, and I thought it was kind of weird the way he said, if I was comfortable. It sounded like he was saying I really shouldn't be, or that most people around here wouldn't be comfortable with it. I figured maybe he meant that most people just didn't sleep in their cars, and not that sleeping in my car here specifically is the problem. I got back in my car and laid the seat back, setting an alarm for 3 a.m., which was about 4 hours from then. After 15 minutes, I heard the guy lock up the gas station doors, and his car drive away. I looked around. Now, without the gas station lights on, it was pitch black, and extremely quiet. It was actually kind of eerie, being alone there. I closed my eyes again. Honestly, I'm unsure whether I fell asleep or not, because my eyes were closed and I was trying to for so long, at least an hour or so, when I suddenly heard the sound of tires pulling into the gravel outside of the gas station. They got closer and closer until I eventually opened my eyes to see what was going on. I felt my heart get a little faster, seeing a dark pickup truck right beside my car. What the hell were they doing here? None of their headlights were on either. I couldn't see the driver, or really anything other than the truck outlined by the darkness around it. But it was facing me, so I felt like there was a chance whoever was in there could see me. I got really uncomfortable and didn't want to take any chances. I quickly put my seat back up, turned my car on, and drove out of there. I hoped it was nothing, but the way it all happened felt really strange. An empty, closed gas station in the middle of nowhere, and a truck decides to pull in with all its lights off and pull right up to my car. Couldn't really think of how that wasn't something bad. Getting out of there and back on the road made me feel a lot safer though. However, I barely got a quarter mile away from the gas station before I hit something in the middle of the gravel road. I only caught a glimpse of it in my headlights before my tire ran it over, and it sounded like a pretty bad hit. I quickly pulled off to the side and looked in my rear mirror, but couldn't get a good enough look, so I put the car in park and stepped out. Again, I noticed how quiet it was outside. Just the cold wind blowing around as I walked down the road and tried to see what it was that I hit. It looked like a large duffel bag, but like really large. And honestly, the reason I was so curious as to get out and look is because it kind of looked like a body bag. Maybe it was just my mind's tendency to always think the worst. But I didn't even get close enough to it before hearing the distant sound of tires pushing through the gravel down the road. I looked up and saw nothing but pitch black as the sound got closer and closer. I ran back to my car and got in. I glanced in my mirror as the sound got even louder before that truck suddenly appeared in my back headlights. looked like they were going insanely fast, speeding right past the object in the road, and suddenly slamming on their brakes and swerving behind my car, abruptly stopping. The front and side door both opened, and two men jumped out, but by then I was already flooring it back down the road. I couldn't believe how much my hands were shaking as I tried to call 911. Each time, the call would connect for a couple of seconds, then the line would drop because I had no signal. Thankfully, I don't think the truck continued to follow me though, as I never saw them again. That stretch of road went on for maybe 45 minutes before I found a different road to get on that led to a more populated area. Calling the police at that point probably didn't help much, but I did anyway. Half hour later, I got a call back saying they found nothing at all in the area. The rest of the drive, and honestly the entire trip, I was genuinely horrified of what I might have stumbled across that night. I don't know what that truck was up to, or what I saw in the middle of the road, but thinking about what it all could have been still gives me chills. I never took that way ever again, and haven't heard of any information as to what might have happened that night. I was 23 and driving across the country in a small van. It wasn't one of those really nice ones with the whole setup or anything. Mine wasn't big and basically just had a mattress in the back, with a bunch of stuff in cardboard boxes all over the floor. My parents lived on the West Coast, where I was headed to store a lot of my stuff at their place, while I figured out my whole situation. It was kind of a mess, to be honest. Anyway, this was my first time even going on a drive this far, and not staying in any hotels along the way. The first full day went decently. It was exhausting, but manageable. I think I drove a total of 14 hours, so by the time I felt ready to stop for the night, it was around 12 a.m. There was a sign for a rest stop in 20 miles, which I assumed would have a bunch of truckers and other cars also staying there to sleep. However, when I pulled in, I immediately noticed how wrong I was. The rest stop was down an exit ramp from the highway and went sort of into a wooded area, with trees covering all views of the road, and there wasn't a single car or truck there. When I parked and looked around, I got a really unsettling feeling. It was so tucked away and isolated from the highway, and with nobody else around, it felt almost like I was parked at an abandoned building in the middle of a desolate forest. You'd think nobody being around would be peaceful, but it was the exact opposite. I turned my van off and got out to go into the building and use the restroom. Couldn't even hear any cars on the highway. It was just the calm sound of cicadas in the trees. I walked into the rest stop, and it was fairly clean. I don't know if that meant people were here a lot, or the other way around. As I walked back to my van, though, I got that uneasy feeling again. The forest around me was really dense, and it almost felt like something or someone was lurking out there. Of course, I chalked the feeling up to being nervous about my first time sleeping in a van at a rest stop, and nothing more. I got inside and pulled a curtain across the front of the cab, blocking any views from the front into the back. Then I laid down on my mattress, and despite all the unsettling feelings, I was exhausted enough to fall asleep pretty much instantly. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to hearing voices outside of the van. I quickly sat up and listened. Sounded like two men talking somewhere just outside of my van, maybe in the parking spot right next to mine. I checked the time. It was 3 a.m. I thought it was almost impossible that the parking lot went from completely empty to full enough that someone would park right next to me, but I really hoped that was the case. I got up and pulled the curtains back just enough to peek my head out. I looked out at the parking area and didn't see a single other car. Then I looked out the other window, instantly locking eyes with a man staring right at me from just outside the window. I froze, and the man quickly went behind the van walls, away from the window. I backed away and pulled the curtains across the front. Then I froze again. I heard both men whisper back and forth, before it suddenly went quiet. Neither were talking, and I didn't hear any movement. I must have waited 5 minutes before pulling the curtain back and looking around. As it seemed, the men were gone. I looked in all directions, even checking the mirrors, but they were nowhere. They must have snuck away into the woods, which made me even more unsettled. I grabbed my keys, turned on the van, and pulled out of the rest stop. No way I was gonna sleep there after that. I started driving, and I'm not sure if the light hadn't come on yet, or if I was too focused on getting away from there to realize it right away, but I made it just halfway up the ramp leading onto the highway when I noticed my van was really struggling to gain speed. Then I noticed a blinking red light on my dash. It was for my back right tire, and as soon as I saw it, I could feel it too. The wheel felt like it was dragging on the pavement. I looked in the mirror, and it was even more noticeable from there. My stomach sank. It had to be those men outside the van. I really did my best not to panic, but all the horrifying thoughts started to flood my mind. I frantically looked in the mirrors, making sure the guys weren't coming up from anywhere, as I thought of the best way to get out of this situation. The big problem was that since I had stopped on an incline from the road connecting to the highway, the van couldn't go up with the busted tire. And then I heard something outside. I looked up at the forest beside me. I stared out for a second, feeling the tension rising, before a sudden knock came at the window next to me. It was that guy, smiling and knocking on my window. "Hey, need some help? I can change that tire for you, if you need. Don't think you'll be getting out of here anytime soon, with the wheel looking like that," he said in a disturbingly calm voice. I found it really creepy that he didn't come up in a car or anything, and he never mentioned the other guy that I knew I heard him talking to before. I was so scared though, I didn't even respond. I got my phone out and started dialing 911, hoping the man seeing me call the police would scare him enough to leave. But the man knocked on the window again, saying he'd help me and that I didn't need to call anyone. As I started explaining my situation to the operator, the man got more aggressive, hitting the window and even trying to open the door, which was when I knew I couldn't wait for the cops to get here. I needed to leave immediately. I put the van in reverse and started rolling back down the ramp. I'm not gonna lie, it sounded like the van was dying. The scraping and thumping from the wheel, knowing it could fall off and get me even more stranded, was terrifying. The man followed as well, trying to chase my van down to the rest stop. Once I was back on the flat surface of the parking lot, I floored it, this time not stopping on the incline, and barely my van made it up to the highway. I drove a bit, still with the tire making awful sounds and probably killing my van. Then I pulled off and waited for the cops. The men didn't seem to have a car, and they didn't seem to chase me onto the highway, probably because the rest stop was isolated and they could get away with whatever they were trying without any witnesses around. But when the cops arrived and looked for them, they were gone. I'm pretty sure had I stayed in my van and not tried to leave, the men would have broken inside. And if I'd opened the door or let the man try to fix my tire, which obviously he had slashed, the other guy was likely hiding in the forest nearby, waiting to jump me. What they were really trying, I'm not sure. Maybe it was to steal my van and everything in it. But from everything that happened, leaving me as a witness seems unlikely. So I have a feeling that night was really close to being my last.
I had a pretty creepy experience when I took a road trip last summer with my girlfriend. We both had a little bit of time off work as we're both teachers. We love to travel and explore the country by driving around. That way we can stop at lots of cool places along the way. So we were going on a road trip to visit a couple of cities that we had never been to before. It was a fun time, and on the way back we were taking turns driving as we had before. I was doing most of the driving, probably like 70% of it, and my girlfriend would get a few hours of driving in here and there when I got tired. At one point we stopped at this truck stop gas station area for a rest. We had to get gas, and we both needed to use the restroom anyways. It was pretty large, and there was a ton of trucks on one end and then cars on the other. There was a store with showers and lots of food and stuff for sale inside. We stopped there at like 8 p.m. and it was decently busy. My girlfriend and I split up. I fueled the car and she went ahead and went inside of the store. Then when I was done fueling, I parked the car in another spot. I went inside and used the restroom, but then just went straight back to the car. My girlfriend was still inside getting snacks. A few minutes later, she came back and we left. Now, I believe that when we left that place, a truck started following us. It was an average-looking pickup truck, sort of old. I didn't really pay much attention right away. When we got back out on the highway as well, there was a decent amount of other cars around. But I just know that when it quieted down about an hour later, I remember seeing this truck behind us. I knew that it had been there for a while, but I hadn't been paying attention to exactly when. I just remember changing lanes to pass a car, and the truck did the same thing. This was not strange, but when I put my car on cruise control when I got back in the right lane, I decided to just cruise there. I was having a snack of corn nuts that my girlfriend got me, and when eating and driving at the same time, I don't feel like passing people. I usually just cruise, so I was going at about 5 over the limit, and even though there weren't that many cars around, eventually some passed me. But this truck never did. It got closer to us and was not quite tailgating, but was following pretty close. It stayed in the right lane just behind me. I kept thinking that he would pass me as others were, but he never did. Eventually, I started to wonder about him. At this point, I was still not that suspicious, but I just found it a bit odd. So I kept going for like another hour with the truck behind me the entire way. Then we ended up losing signal on our cell phones. This happens when traveling across country sometimes. But it was too bad because the maps on our phones both stopped working. Many times, even when the signal is down on my phone, the map will still work, but this time it didn't. We knew that we were supposed to change roads up ahead, but I didn't know which exit it was. After driving for like another 20 minutes, I saw an exit that I thought I was supposed to take. That would connect us with the next highway that we were supposed to drive on. When we took that exit, the truck did as well, which made me suspicious. After taking the exit though, I started to see detour signs. My girlfriend and I were both very confused. We couldn't remember the road number that we were supposed to be on. I thought that it was correct, but I didn't know for sure. So we kept going and followed this detour. But things quickly seemed wrong. This detour took us off one quiet highway and then onto this really quiet and smaller road. That led us to an even smaller one-lane road and then to some random dirt road. Each new road that we were on, we seemed more and more lost. By now, I realized that I needed to turn around, but this truck was still there. I could not tell who was behind the wheel other than the silhouette looked like a man, but it was dark out. Eventually, when we were on this dirt road, I saw that it appeared as though the road was completely blocked up ahead. I didn't know what to do. I pulled over to the side of the road right there. The truck pulled over behind me. For a moment, I considered getting out and asking the guy what he was doing, but I quickly thought better of it. Then I decided to make a U-turn. However, as soon as I started to turn around, the truck turned to the left. I thought that the truck was also making a U-turn, but it stopped when it was completely blocking the road. It just stayed there and didn't move. So at that point, I stopped making a U-turn and turned forward. I drove up towards the sign blocking the road. I didn't know if I would be able to get past the truck, as it appeared to be blocking me. I drove to the sign and then decided to go around it. I went slightly off the road and then went around the sign. Past it, the road still seemed fine. I then saw the truck starting to turn and move again. I floored it and went down that dirt road as fast as I could. Then I saw that the road had an intersection up ahead. I went to the left and then continued going faster. I turned again at the next road and then turned my lights off. I literally could barely see, but I carefully kept going and did not see the truck at all in my mirror. I did my best to then backtrack to the general direction of the highway. My girlfriend was trying to get a signal on her phone, but it wouldn't work. Soon enough, I turned my lights back on. We must have been navigating there for about 30 minutes until I miraculously made it back to the highway. Then I was able to finally get back on track and get a signal on my phone. I never saw the truck behind me after that, and my girlfriend and I were able to make it back okay. But I still wonder about that truck. What did that guy want, and what could have happened?
I'd been searching Facebook Marketplace for weeks, trying to find a decent laptop. My old one died, and I couldn't afford anything new. I found a listing of a barely used MacBook Pro at $400. The photos look legit, with the protective film on the screen, original box, and all the accessories. The seller's name was Kevin. His profile looked normal enough. He had maybe 50 friends and a few photos of him at what looked like baseball games. His messages were polite and detailed. He said he'd gotten the laptop as a gift, but already had one for work. He sent me a video of the sealed box with that day's newspaper next to it to prove it was real. I was sold. We arranged to meet that Saturday around 7. His location on the listing said he was in the area, but when I asked where to meet, he said he'd actually driven up to visit family about 45 minutes north and asked if I could meet him there instead. I wasn't thrilled about the drive, but $400 for that laptop was too good to pass up. I asked my roommate Riley if she wanted to come along and promised I'd buy her dinner on the way back. She agreed. Kevin suggested meeting at the town's public park. We left around 6:30, which gave us plenty of time to get there. Riley and I talked about how we'd spend the rest of the night, probably hitting up some bars and making a whole evening of it. The drive took us through increasingly rural areas with lots of farmland, scattered houses, and dense patches of trees. By the time we got close, it was almost dark. The park sat at the end of a quiet road. It was empty, except for a few streetlights flickering through the trees. The playground was dark. Swings were creaking in the wind. We drove around it twice, looking for Kevin's silver Honda, but couldn't find him. I called him. He picked up on the first ring and said his car wouldn't start. Asked if we could help him jump it. He had cables. He was only about 10 minutes away and sent me the location. I pulled it up on my phone. It was just a pin dropped on what looked like an empty road surrounded by woods. Riley immediately said no, that this was sketchy as hell and we should just go home. But I'd driven 45 minutes already and didn't want to waste the trip. I told Riley we'd just drive by and see if he was actually there. She reluctantly agreed. The road was narrow and unlit with trees on both sides. As we got closer to the pin, I saw headlights ahead. A car was parked on the shoulder with its hazards on. I slowed down. It was silver. Could have been a Honda, but I couldn't see anyone inside. No one was standing outside either. The interior looked completely empty. Riley told me to keep driving. I was already accelerating past it when my phone started ringing. It was Kevin. I didn't answer, but he wouldn't stop calling. Then the text started. Saw you drive past. Why didn't you stop? Turn around. I'm right here. Need your help, girl. I ignored all of it. Riley was already looking up places to eat nearby and found a dinner about 15 minutes away. She joked about the whole thing. The place was small and quiet, with just us and an older couple in a corner booth. We sat near the window and ordered coffee. The waitress was bringing it over when a guy in a dark hoodie walked in. He sat at the counter with his hood still up and ordered coffee without looking at anyone. But every minute or so, he'd glance over at our table. I leaned across the table and whispered to Riley that the guy might be Kevin. Riley didn't turn around, just asked if I was serious. When the waitress brought the guy his coffee, he said thank you loud enough for the whole diner to hear. It was Kevin's voice from the phone call. I told Riley we needed to leave. I asked the waitress for the check, said we just needed the coffee to go. She asked if everything was okay. I paid fast. We picked up our coffee and headed for the door. Riley said the guy was getting up. I didn't look back, just got to my car and started it. Through the diner window, I saw him moving toward the door. I pulled out of the parking lot faster than I should have. There was a silver Honda parked next to the exit. We got back on the highway. I was doing maybe 80. About 20 minutes into the drive, my low tire pressure light came on. The PSI dropped fast. I had to pull over before I destroyed the rim. My tire was slashed along the sidewall. He must have done it while we were in the diner. Changing it took almost 20 minutes. Cars kept flying past, and it made the whole thing more stressful. Every set of headlights in the rear view made my heart race. We made it home around 11. I still bought Riley dinner like I'd promised, though neither of us had much appetite anymore. She asked what I thought would have happened if we'd stopped to help jump Kevin's car. I didn't have an answer. Didn't want to think about it. We reported the incident to the police the next day. They said they'd look into it, but weren't optimistic. The profile was probably fake, and the phone number led them to nowhere. They were right. The profile was deleted by that evening. I didn't check the number. Riley and I never brought it up, but every time I see a listing that seems too good to be true, I think about that dark road, that empty silver Honda, and the guy in the hoodie watching us from the counter. How close we came to stopping, how different that night could have ended if we'd just been a little bit more trusting. I bought my laptop from Best Buy 2 weeks later at full price. Honestly, I don't care. Can't risk my life for a cheap deal, right? I was home alone for 2 weeks while my parents vacationed in Europe that summer. My younger brother had gone with them, but I'd stayed behind because of my job at the hospital. The timing seemed perfect to finally sell my dad's vintage comic book collection that had been gathering dust in the basement. He'd been talking about selling it for years, but never got around to it. I figured if I listed it while they were gone, made the sale, and surprised them with the cash when they got back, they'd be thrilled. The collection was worth at least $800 based on what I'd researched online. I listed it on Facebook Marketplace for $650, hoping for a quick sale. Within hours, an interested shopper named Sabrina Lee reached out to me. She said she loved collecting vintages and couldn't wait to add the comics to her collection. She offered me $600 cash. I should have been more suspicious, but I was excited about the sale. I told her to come by around 7. Sabrina didn't show up. When I asked her, she cited work reasons and rescheduled the pickup to 8, then to 9. Each time, she'd apologize and say she was almost there. She insisted she was only 15 minutes away and had driven for over an hour to get to me. She really didn't want to waste the trip. Against my better judgment, I'd agreed to wait till 10:30. At 10:47, she finally messaged me saying she'd arrived. I looked out the front window and saw a beat-up sedan parked at the curb. The interior light came on, and I watched as 4 people got out, a woman and 3 men, all in their 20s. I messaged asking if she brought friends. She didn't answer. They walked up the driveway. I kept the screen door locked and opened the main door just a crack. The woman, presumably Sabrina, smiled and asked if I was David. I confirmed, but I said I hadn't expected her to bring other people. She made up stuff about the guys being her brothers, and the late night, and that they'd wait outside. She tried really hard to get me to open the door. I didn't. I could tell she was annoyed. Suddenly, she started pulling on the screen door handle, asking what the problem was. The three guys behind her moved closer. I shut the main door and locked it, wishing they'd get the hint and leave. They didn't. Instead, they started yelling at me about wasting their time, demanding I open the door. One of the guys started pounding on it, shouting obscenities while his friends laughed. I moved away from the door and watched through the dining room window as they stood on the porch for nearly 15 minutes, knocking periodically and talking among themselves. From my brother's upstairs bedroom, I could see the driveway below. One of the guys was urinating on the concrete right next to my mom's flower bed. They were making no effort to hide what they were doing. Eventually, they left, got back in the car, and drove off slowly, like they weren't in any hurry. I deleted the listing immediately and blocked the account. I didn't call 911 because I thought it was done and dusted. Around 2 in the morning, I heard glass breaking downstairs. I was out of bed instantly. I grabbed my phone and hid in the closet. I could hear multiple footsteps downstairs, sounds of cabinets and drawers opening. I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher about these intruders. She told me to stay on the line, stay quiet, that officers were on the way. The footsteps came upstairs. I could hear them going through my parents' bedroom, my brother's room. One of them tried my door handle and found it locked. Someone kicked it. Once, twice. The frame splintered but held. Then they moved on and continued down the hall. The dispatcher kept asking if I was okay. I couldn't respond, just kept the phone pressed to my ear. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than 5 minutes, I heard them go back downstairs. The back door slammed. The police arrived about 8 minutes after I'd called. Found the kitchen window completely shattered with glass all over the floor. The back door had been forced open from the inside. They took my dad's laptop, my mom's jewelry box, cash from my brother's room, and some of my gaming equipment. The total value was probably over $3,000. The officer taking my report asked if I knew who might have done this. I showed him the Facebook messages and explained what had happened earlier that evening. He said I should have called them the first time, when the group showed up. Said that this was clearly a setup. They'd come to scope out the house, see who was home, and check the layout. I gave my statement to the detectives the next day, embellished a bit, and said one of the guys had threatened me through the door. I figured it would have made them take it more seriously. They did. Got a warrant for the Facebook account data and tracked down the IP address. Sabrina, the real name Tiffany Marsh, lived 2 towns over with a record for theft and drug possession. The warrant on her apartment recovered most of what had been stolen from my parents' house. She gave up the 3 guys immediately, trying to cut a deal. All 4 were charged with burglary, conspiracy, and trespassing. Most of the stolen items were returned before my parents got home. I had to tell them what had happened, obviously. They were furious, not about the break-in itself, but that I'd put their house at risk by trying to sell something without asking. My dad was actually relieved the comics were safe. They installed a security system the following week. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. I moved out 6 months later and got my own place across town. But I still think about it sometimes. About how my stupidity could have cost me more than a burglary. I don't use Facebook Marketplace anymore. When I moved into my first apartment, I needed to get rid of a lot of stuff. My dad was tired of storing my old furniture in his garage, so I listed everything on Facebook Marketplace. Old desk, video games, a leather couch, and this 1970s Marantz record player I'd inherited from my uncle. The record player was the prize item. I listed it for $450. It was worth more, but I needed it gone quickly. For the first week, I got the usual responses. People would ask if it was still available and then disappear. Then, someone named Marcus reached out. His profile picture showed a guy in his early 30s wearing sunglasses at the beach. The account was pretty sparse with the privacy settings locked down, but we had 4 mutual friends from high school, and his last name matched someone I vaguely remember from high school, so I figured it was legit. Marcus said he was interested and asked if he could pick it up. He didn't haggle on price or ask questions about the condition, which should have been a red flag. But I was just excited to make the sale. I told him I was free most evenings after 6. He said he worked till late, but could swing by around midnight. I agreed. I tried being friendly and asked if he'd gone to Lincoln High. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared a few times before he finally responded with a vague, "Yeah." I said I thought I'd recognized his name. He left me on scene for hours. When he did respond, he just asked for my address. I sent it, and again he left me on scene. The rest of the day went by without anything. Around 11:30, I texted to ask if he was still coming. His response came at 11:47, saying he was outside. I looked out my second-floor window and saw a black SUV parked across the street with the engine running in tinted windows. I called the number. It rang twice before going to voicemail. I texted back saying I'd buzz him in so he could come up and check it out. He insisted I bring it down to the lobby, said his friend was with him and that they could carry it to the car after looking at it. It sounded reasonable enough, but something about the whole thing felt suspicious. I told him it was pretty heavy to get down the stairs by myself, and he said just get it to the lobby and they'd come in to help from there. The way he was texting didn't match the profile at all. The Marcus I remembered was this preppy lacrosse player who'd used proper punctuation. My gut was telling me something was wrong. I tried calling again, and it went straight to voicemail. So, I texted Kayla, the girl I'd stayed friends with from high school, asking if she knew Marcus well and if this was actually his number. She responded pretty quickly, saying that's not Marcus. Marcus had moved to Seattle years ago and didn't have Facebook anymore. My stomach dropped. I looked out the window again, and the SUV was still there with the engine running. I turned off my living room lights and moved to the side window that faced the parking lot. That's when I spotted a guy in a dark hoodie standing between 2 cars, mostly hidden in the shadows. He was looking up at my building, and when a car drove past, the headlights lit up his face for a second. He was staring directly at my window. My phone buzzed with another text. "You coming down or what?" I didn't respond, just locked my door, made sure the chain was on, and stayed away from the windows. Another text came through saying that he could see my lights go off and asking what my problem was. Then another one said his buddy drove all the way out there and I was wasting their time. So, there were definitely at least 2 of them. I looked through the blinds again, and the guy in the parking lot was gone, but the SUV was still sitting there. My phone started ringing. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, and I ignored it again. Then a text came through saying this was messed up and they knew where I lived now. I called the police non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said she'd send someone over, but it might take a while. She told me to stay inside and not engage with them. I kept watching from the window, and about 10 minutes later, the guy in the hoodie got in the SUV. It sat there for another 5 minutes before finally driving off. The police showed up about 40 minutes later and took my statement. They said they'd patrol the area, but couldn't really do much since no actual crime had been committed. Suggested I report the Facebook account and block the number. I did both right away. The profile was deleted by the next morning. 2 days later, I got a text from a different number saying, "Nice try calling the cops," and that they can't watch me forever. Said I should have just opened the door when they asked nicely. I reported that number too, changed mine, and took down all my marketplace listings. The thing that really messes with me happened about a week later. I ran into Kayla at a coffee shop, and she mentioned that the fake Marcus profile had been messaging a bunch of people we went to school with, and mostly all of them were trying to sell expensive stuff. Apparently, one guy had actually opened his door when someone came to buy furniture from him. 2 guys rushed in as soon as he opened it, beat him up pretty badly, and took his wallet, phone, and keys. When he filed the police report, the detectives found similar cases across 3 different countries. I still think about what would have happened if I'd actually brought the record player down to the lobby like they wanted. I moved about 6 months later to a building with better security in a different part of town. Haven't used Marketplace since. Can't bring myself to do it. It was a few years back. I was 10 at the time. It was during summer, and my parents left me at my cousin's house along with my brother. For privacy reasons, let's call him Jake. My cousins were 7, 13, and 16. The youngest was Mel, the middle one Riley, and the oldest was Daisy. They were all girls, and my aunt was there, but she worked night shifts at the hospital. My parents left us there for a week while they went on a business trip. The first few days were fun. We played games, stayed up late, and watched movies in the living room. Daisy was the babysitter, since my aunt worked night shifts at a nearby hospital. Everything was normal until the 3rd night. Daisy let us make a blanket fort in the living room. We filled it with pillows, snacks, and a flashlight. Around midnight, Mel said she heard tapping from the hallway. We teased her for being scared, but then Jake whispered, "I hear it too." We all went silent. It was slow and uneven, almost like someone dragging their feet. Daisy rolled her eyes, got up, and checked. The hallway was empty. She laughed it off, saying it was the old house creaking. But when she came back, I noticed she quietly locked the front door and closed the curtains. That night, around 2 a.m, I woke up to the sound of Jake whispering my name. "Hey, look." I opened my eyes. He was pointing toward the hallway. The flashlight had died, but I could still make out a faint figure standing by the door. Tall, pale, and still. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I heard it. A woman's voice, soft and shaky. "Come out, sweeties. I made cookies." My heart froze. My aunt was at work. Jake grabbed my arm, whispering, "That's not Auntie." Daisy woke up, realizing something was wrong. We all stayed quiet, huddled together. Then came knocking. Mel started to cry. The doorknob slowly turned, creaking. Daisy whispered, "Stay here," and stood up, clutching a broom like a weapon. The door opened halfway, but there was no one there. The hallway light flickered once, twice, and for a second, I saw her. A woman in a long, white gown, her head tilted, eyes wide open. She was holding something. A plate of cookies. Then, the light went out. Daisy screamed and slammed the door shut. We pushed a chair against it and stayed awake till morning. When my aunt came home, we told her everything. She looked pale, but calm. Then she said something I'll never forget. "That's why I don't let anyone sleep near the hallway. That's where the old lady used to fall." Later, I overheard her telling Daisy that an elderly woman had lived and died in that house alone. They found her body days later, holding a plate of cookies. That night, Jake wouldn't speak. When I asked what he saw, he just whispered, "She waved at me." To this day, whenever I visit that house, Jake refuses to sleep in the living room. And sometimes late at night, if it's really quiet, we still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Followed by a faint voice. "Come out, sweeties. I made cookies."
I'm very happy I'm not in school anymore. I graduated a few years ago, but more and more every day I hear about incidents at school. On the news, on the internet, and in texts my friends send me. All sorts of horror stories. But the stories online are the ones I'm always finding myself glancing through. I've seen stories online of people relating to how their school went into lockdown, and the story ends up being about some hobo who had been living under the school or some crazy person from down the street who finally snapped one day. I don't know if they are true, but all I know is our school went into lockdown once. And I don't know if even the people at my school know the whole story as to what happened. I don't even know if I understand it myself. It still seems like a sort of fever dream, something that didn't happen and couldn't happen. It was the middle of third period, math. I had just finished a big test. Found out later I had made a bunch of mistakes and ended up getting a D, but that's not really important to the story. I used the hall pass to go use the bathroom. Unfortunately, the school bathrooms were all located at the stairwells and, of course, the bathrooms on the first floor where I was were closed for repairs. I had to go up to the second floor, but before I got there, the bell rang. The bell never rang during class before, but as it did, an announcement came over the PA. "Students and faculty, we are entering lockdown and this is not a drill. Please, all students and faculty, follow all school procedures." I froze. I could hear sirens approaching. I came out of the stairwell, but already the doors in the hallway were closing and I could hear them locking. I was alone and out in the open. I could go into the bathroom now, but the doors have had no locks on them since my freshman year, after some juniors trapped a freshman in the bathroom and duct taped him inside his stall. They removed the ability to lock them at all. If there was somebody wandering the school, I'd have no chance if I went in there. I ran down the hall. I could see classrooms turning out their lights and covering the windows. I couldn't turn to them for help. All the instructions said to not answer the door. I had to find someplace safe nearby before something happened. I turned a corner and I saw my chance. The janitor's closet was open. Lunch was up next period, so he was probably out setting up tables when the announcement was made. He wasn't in there and it could easily be locked from the inside, so I jumped in and shut off the light. The only light I saw was from the bottom of the door. I waited and the sirens grew closer and eventually stopped. Time passed and I wasn't sure if I was happy that I couldn't hear anything going on or tense because I had no idea what was happening. Then I heard footsteps. Lots of them. They stopped in the hallway. It must have been police, I thought. I could hear radios and other assorted noises. I didn't think it could be some sort of lone gunman or nutcase, so I listened. One guy in particular sounded like the one in charge. "Okay, are we in position?" Another guy answered. I didn't know what his rank was, but clearly he was not in charge of the first guy. Yes, sir. We know the suspect is here in the building. C team is across the campus, as ordered, and B team is covering the back entrances. He will not exit the building on our watch. The chief responded. Good. Remember, he could look like anyone, but he must not escape. It's my fault he's here, and it's my duty to deal with him. I couldn't hear much for a while. There was too much movement and too many people all talking to each other to make out anybody from where I sat. I just waited for a little while. Maybe it would all just be over soon, and I could leave the closet and go back to class. Then, that's when it all happened. The chief yelled out, Hold it! Put your hands in the air. Commotion outside stopped abruptly. A moment later, clothes rustled loudly as what sounded like a large number of guns were drawn. Lay down on the ground. Leave your hands where we can see them. He stayed quiet, except for a few of the guns cocking. I said down on the ground. Don't you dare. Try what I think you're going to do. You're not at the institute anymore. I thought I would hear shots go off back and forth, and eventually somebody saying, Suspect down. What I didn't expect was the scream. It wasn't a normal scream. It was somebody crying out in terror. It was like a wounded animal, mixed with the sound of a bandsaw hitting concrete. I've never heard anything like it before, and I hope I never hear it again. Then the guns began to fire. The horrible scream happened again, and then other screams, and then the sound of tearing. I saw the shadows under the door as people moved and fell over, and heard the telltale splatter of gore as it soaked the floor. There was another gunshot, and I nearly yelled out myself when a bullet punched through the part of the doorway. It wasn't very big, but I put my eye up against it, and I could see a group of people being attacked by somebody. But something wasn't right about him. He looked too long in places, like he'd been stretched in a taffy machine. He was moving so fast, though, that I couldn't make anything out, except for him grabbing people and throwing them around like they were nothing. There was blood everywhere. More gunshots. Screams happening again. And again. I pulled away from the bullet hole and sat back in the closet. Then the scream began to fade. I heard a thud and then more footsteps. The chief spoke again, but he was breathing heavily like he'd been badly wounded. Team A, he's down. I repeat, he's down. We need to clean up immediately. I didn't move. I wanted to look again, but as curious as I was, I didn't really want to see. But I heard a lot of commotion for a long time, and then nothing. I don't know how long it was after that, but then the PA announced lockdown had ended. I came out of the closet, tried not to look, but for all the sounds I had heard, there was not as much sign of a fight as I thought there would be. Even the blood I had seen in that brief time through the bullet hole had all been removed. I went back to my class and just told everyone I had hidden in a stall in the bathroom. People were impressed with my guts for doing it, but if nobody else had heard that scream, I certainly didn't want to bring it up. As you might expect, we all went home early that day. Police and EMT were everywhere, but as far as I could see, nobody was being taken away by either. My parents came and were so happy that I was alright. They had been following everything on the news and came as soon as they could. At home that night, I ate dinner and waited to see what happened on the news. The live coverage had ended a long time ago, but when the news came back on at 10 o'clock, I wanted to see everything. As it started, I saw classes had been cancelled for the rest of the week, but then things started to get weird. The news talked about a student who they refused to name, how he had come to school armed but had been taken into custody after a short firefight. Stranger still, in the footage of the hallway where the scuffle had taken place, the door of the closet, which had been my refuge, was totally unscathed. Not so much as a scratch on it, let alone bullet holes. It appeared to have been replaced outright well before any investigation could have been completed. I saw pictures of the student being led away in cuffs. He didn't have a mark on him. He wasn't even wounded as he was pushed into a police car and driven away. All I saw was him fighting and yelling. Even in my glimpses through that bullet hole, I knew that wasn't the same one I saw. The clothes were completely different. The one I had seen had been wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. The one getting into the police car was wearing a white t-shirt and shorts. The news said nobody had been hurt despite the gunfire, but I knew people had been wounded, even killed. I'd heard them screaming in agony as something vicious had attacked them. And then there was what the chief guy had said, talking about something being his fault, the institution, that he could look like anyone. I don't know what happened that day for certain. I didn't see enough and I didn't hear enough to get the full story, but this is what I can tell you. I know there was no shooter at our school. I know that somebody was arrested that day. Someone who I didn't know, who I never heard about ever again. That's right, a shooter who never made another day's worth of news. Just disappeared. When was the last time that ever happened? I know that chief guy and his squads were not cops. I don't know who they were, but I know cops don't clean up a crime scene like that. And no human being has ever screamed like that. ever. But whatever it was that I heard attacking those people, all I know is it came into that hallway where I was. I was alone, and if it hadn't been for that janitor's closet, I wouldn't have been safe. It could have looked like anyone. Something tells me that squad wouldn't have helped me either. What was it? How long had it been in our school? Had I ever been alone with it and never known what it was? Who were those people who had come for it? Where had it come from? My name's Ryan Green, and I teach 7th grade English at a middle school in a mid-sized town in Ohio. It's one of those schools that tries to feel new but already has that worn-in, tired look. I've worked there for 4 years now, and until last spring, nothing truly bad had ever happened. This all took place on a Thursday afternoon in May. The end of the school year was close. The kids were restless, and everybody had checked out mentally. It was 4th period, right before lunch. My students were working on some short stories, and for once, the room was quiet. That's when the lockdown alarm went off. Now, we've done drills before. Every teacher and student in that building knew the sound. But there's a difference between the drill voice over the intercom and that raw, fast, repeating buzz that means it's the real thing. The air in the room instantly changed. I remember saying, "Alright guys, that's lockdown, you know what to do." Trying to sound calm even though my voice cracked halfway through. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and motioned for everybody to get into the corner, farthest from the windows. We'd practiced it a dozen times. But practice never prepares you for the real thing. And real panic. Sneakers scuffing the floor, chairs scraping as they try to move quietly but quickly. I crouched near the door, just close enough to see the narrow strip of light from the hallway through the bottom of the door frame. I could still hear the faint echo of the alarm coming from the other end of the school. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped, and the building went dead quiet. Then the silence started to feel wrong. Usually during lockdown drills, the principal or somebody on the intercom would remind everybody it's just practice. But this time, nothing. Just the occasional nervous breath or sniffle from one of my students. I could feel my own pulse in my throat. I checked the clock on my desk. It had only been 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I took out my phone and texted a few of the other teachers in my group chat. "Any info?" Nobody responded. About 2 minutes later, there were footsteps in the hallway. They stopped right outside my door. Every kid froze. Even the air felt still. I could see the faint shadow of someone's legs under the crack of the door. Then there was a soft knock. I didn't move. The knocking came again, this time louder. Then a man's voice said, "It's Officer Daniels. We're checking rooms." That's when I started shaking my head to myself, no. We'd been told not to open the door for anyone, even if they claimed to be police. Only admin or actual officers accompanied by admin would unlock rooms after an all clear. But his tone, it was steady, firm, like how a real cop sounds. I hesitated. My students were staring at me like I was supposed to know what to do. I mouthed, "Stay quiet," and kept my hand on the lock. He knocked again, a little harder. "Mr. Green? It's safe now, you can open up." Hearing my name made my stomach drop. I hadn't said a word since the lockdown started. The classroom phone hadn't rung. The only way someone could know my name was if they actually knew me or if they'd been reading the labels outside each classroom door. I didn't answer. After a few seconds, the voice got closer to the door, like he was leaning in. "Ryan, do you hear me? It's all clear." The way he said my first name, way too casual. And then it went back to silence. We stayed like that for probably 15 minutes. My legs started cramping from staying crouched by the wall. One of the girls started crying quietly, and another student hugged her, whispering that it'd be okay. I wanted to say the same, but I didn't believe it. Eventually, I heard a new sound, like a clink sound. Then another. It took me a second to realize somebody was trying to use a key on the door. That's when every hair on my neck stood up. Whoever it was fumbling, trying multiple keys like they weren't sure which one fit. I slowly grabbed a heavy metal stool from beside my desk and stood ready with it raised, just in case the door opened. The sound stopped. A few seconds later, there were fast footsteps going down the hall. And then, screaming. It came from somewhere near the main office, followed by what sounded like something heavy crashing, maybe a chair or a table. Then another scream, this one definitely from a student. One of my kids whispered, "Oh no," and I motioned for them to stay quiet. We could hear running, more doors slamming, and faint yelling. then the sound of someone over the PA system. Their voice shaky. Remain in lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. That voice belonged to our assistant principal, Miss Diaz. Hearing her tone, that shaky edge made it all feel more real. After that, time blurred. Could have been 10 minutes or 40. Nobody dared to speak. I kept checking my phone but still had no service. Probably overloaded from everyone else doing the same. Then finally, around what must have been 12:45, I heard loud footsteps again. This time more organized, multiple people walking together, the distinct sound of radios crackling. A loud knock. This is the police. If anyone's inside, do not open. We are unlocking doors one at a time. Through the window panel, I could see the reflection of a tactical vest and a gloved hand holding a key ring. The lock clicked, and the door opened just a few inches. A sheriff's deputy poked his head in and whispered, "You're all safe. Follow us to the gym." My students filed out, shaking and some crying. I stayed near the back of the line, counting heads over and over. The hallways were filled with more officers, their guns drawn and pointed downward. When we got to the gym, I finally saw the other teachers and students gathered, everybody pale and exhausted. I spotted Miss Diaz near the bleachers on the phone. It took about 20 more minutes before anyone told us what happened. Apparently a man had entered through a side door. Around 11:30 a.m., one that maintenance had left propped open for a delivery. He wasn't armed, at least not with a gun, but he was carrying a metal crowbar and a large backpack. A janitor spotted him in the hallway outside the main office and asked who he was. The man said he was looking for his daughter. The janitor knew right away that wasn't right. Nobody was supposed to have visitors without signing in, and went to alert the office. That's when the man started yelling and slamming the crowbar against the locker. The school resource officer tried to approach him, but the man ran down the hallway toward the math wing, where most of the classrooms led directly to the lobby area. That's when the lockdown alarm was triggered. He never made it to any classrooms, thankfully, but he did manage to break into the front office by smashing the glass panel with a crowbar. That's where the screaming came from. Miss Diaz and two secretaries locked themselves in the nurse's room while the man tore through papers and threw things around the front desk. By the time the police arrived, he'd already fled through a back exit. They caught him about 20 minutes later, in the woods behind the baseball fields. He was apparently a former student's father, someone who had been banned from the property a year earlier after threatening a teacher during a parent meeting. The scariest part, he'd been spotted earlier that morning walking around the parking lot, but nobody thought much of it because there was a walking trail nearby. That night I couldn't sleep. I just kept replaying the sound of that voice outside my door, saying my name. The next day I went back to school for a staff debrief. One of the officers pulled me aside and said something that made my blood run cold. They reviewed the security footage, and at one point, the man had stopped at my classroom door. He spent almost 2 full minutes there. In the footage, you can see him bending down to read the name plaque next to the door. Mr. R. Green, room 204. Then seconds later, he started knocking. The officer told me they think he was trying to find his daughter's old teacher, but her last name was Greenfield. The similarity in names was probably what brought him to my door. If I had opened it, if I believed that voice, I don't even like to imagine what could have happened. Classes resumed the following Monday, but things felt off. The blinds on my door stayed down for weeks after that. Every time a footstep echoed in the hallway, I froze for half a second. Even now, months later, when the PA system crackles to life, my heart still jumps a little. I've learned when you hear about lockdowns in the news, it always feels distant, like something that happens to other people. But when you're the one huddled in a dark classroom trying to keep 20 terrified kids quiet while someone knocks on your door, that's when you realize just how thin the line is between ordinary life and the moment everything breaks. I was a junior at the time, and gym class was at the end of the day, third period on Mondays and Wednesdays. The gym itself was old, echoing with the slap of sneakers on the hardwood floor, the squeak of basketballs, and the smell of sweat mixed with old disinfectant. We had a sub that day because our regular gym teacher, Coach Raymond, had a meeting. I remember thinking it was strange because our subs usually came in with a clipboard, a whistle, and a list of activities. This sub, though, didn't introduce herself at first. She just walked in quietly, a clipboard in hand, but her demeanor was like, off. And there was him. Nobody remembered him signing up. He was new, at least he claimed to be. He said his name was Evan and that he had just moved to the district. He was tall and pale, with dark greasy hair that hung in his eyes. His gym uniform didn't exactly fit. Shorts were too short and the shirt was a size too big. But the weirdest thing about him was how calm he was. Everybody else was joking around, shooting basketballs or talking about the upcoming homecoming game. And Evan just watched. He never laughed, never spoke to anyone, and when you made eye contact with him, he seemed to be staring through you. We started the class with a warm-up jog around the gym. Most of us laughed, the usual slow kids trying to keep up, but Evan stayed at the back, keeping perfect pace, without even seeming to breathe hard. By the time we got to basketball, he had already silently claimed a hoop for himself, spinning the ball on his finger and shooting with precision that was almost unnatural. Halfway through, Coach's sub, her name was Miss Langley, as we eventually learned, blew her whistle. "Line up for a quick drill," she said. Everybody did, except for Evan, who lingered behind. When she told him to join, he didn't respond, not verbally. He just walked over slowly, almost gliding, and lined up at the end of the row. Nobody said anything, but there was an odd tension in the air. About 10 minutes into a passing drill, something happened that made the entire gym go quiet. Evan caught a ball that was thrown a little too high, and for a second, he just stood there. Not looking around, not passing it back, just holding the ball like it weighed nothing, staring at the floor. Then he slowly looked up, and his eyes locked onto mine. I swore I could feel it. That moment lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. Then the whistle blew. Miss Langley called everybody over. "Okay, we're going to do some team scrimmage," she said, trying to sound normal, but her voice had an edge, like she was nervously forcing it. Evan didn't move at first. He just turned and walked toward the far end of the gym, completely ignoring the teams. I glanced at my friends, and they all had the same uneasy look on their faces. The scrimmage started, and we tried to ignore him, but then I noticed something strange. Evan wasn't just standing off to the side. He was watching everybody intently, almost like he was memorizing every movement. He didn't blink much. His gaze flicked from player to player, then back to the ball, then back to us. I tried to shake it off, but the more I watched, the more it felt like he wasn't human. Not in the sense of being a person, just wrong. Then the gym lights flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough to make my heart jump. When they stabilized, Evan was closer. Nobody had seen him move. He was just suddenly near the sideline, standing behind the benches, silently observing. A few kids laughed nervously, but even they didn't approach him. That's when it started. A soft tapping noise, almost like fingernails on the wooden floor, echoing from the far side of the gym. Everybody paused mid-play, looking around. It wasn't a bounce from the basketballs, and it wasn't from shoes on the floor. It was 100% coming from Evan. He was tapping the ball lightly on the ground, slowly, rhythmically, but the sound didn't match the motion. It was sharper and hollow, like somebody was testing a weapon. Miss Langley walked toward him. "Evan, you're going to need to join a team," she said, trying to keep her tone calm. He didn't respond. He didn't even look at her. He just kept tapping the ball and staring straight ahead. Then the announcement came over the PA. "Lock down. Lock all doors. This is not a drill." A collective gasp swept through the gym. The sub froze, staring toward the doors. Evan stopped tapping the ball and turned to face the exits like he was expecting someone. His head tilted slowly, almost unnaturally, like a predator listening for the slightest movement. We all scrambled to the corners, teachers yelling for us to get down and cover ourselves or do anything to stay safe. I dove behind one of the padded mats by the wall with my chest tight, my ears ringing from adrenaline. Then it happened. The first sound that really broke the panic. Not the panicked running of other students or teachers, but one set of footsteps, moving across the gym floor with terrifying precision. I peeked slightly from behind the mat. Evan was moving too, but not like anyone else. He wasn't running, and he wasn't walking. He was sliding or gliding along the floor without sound, keeping pace with the footsteps that weren't his. The sub tried to use her phone to call the office, but the signal was gone. Just as she started typing, the gym door handle rattled. Something was trying to get in. Evan froze, and for a moment, it looked like he was listening. His eyes went wide, his pale face almost ghostly in the dim light of the gym. Then he spoke. Not loud, just a whisper that somehow cut through the silence. They were already inside. Everybody turned toward him, horrified. Miss Langley asked, "Who's inside? What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just looked at each of us, slowly scanning the room, and then crouched low, almost animal-like, keeping himself between the door and the rest of us. My friends next to me were crying quietly. I couldn't move, and I couldn't breathe. Then the footsteps stopped, and it was silent, so thick it pressed down on your ears. And then tapping again, coming from the opposite side of the gym this time. Not from Evan, from the corner where nobody should have been. Everybody froze. I realized with a sinking feeling that this person, whatever it was moving freely inside the building. The school doors were locked, but they had found another entrance and now they were inside. The tapping moved closer, slowly. One step, pause. One step, pause. And then a soft, low whisper. Don't move. Don't even breathe. Miss Langley grabbed her whistle, blew it sharply, then immediately put her hand over her mouth like she had realized it was a terrible idea. Evan stood taller than before and moved toward the sound. He just stared. Then the sound vanished. Nothing. No footsteps, no tapping, just silence. Finally, after what felt like hours, the principal's voice came back over the PA. All students are safe. Lockdown is lifted. We didn't move. Not immediately. We were escorted out in a fashion that made sure each student was accounted for. Every cop and officer there had that tense professional look, scanning every corner. But when we looked back toward the gym, Evan was gone. Nobody could explain how he had disappeared. Nobody knew if he had left with the intruder, if he had been part of it, or if he was something else entirely. Later that night, rumors started. Some students swore they saw Evan outside the school near the tree line, hours after the lockdown ended. Others claimed the police searched the building and found no record of anyone named Evan ever enrolling in the school. No paperwork, no emergency contacts, nothing. I never saw him again, and I never want to.
I was on a spontaneous camping trip in the middle of fall. Sort of made the impulse decision to go for one last trip up to the northern woods of Minnesota before winter rolled in and put everything on hold for several months. I'd been up to these woods many times before, living just a couple hours south, so it was my regular place to go when I wanted to camp or spend a weekend hiking. The spot I was at was a small, secluded lake. The thing about Minnesota that I really loved is that it's known for having thousands of lakes scattered around the northern portion of the state, which means you can pretty often find smaller lakes that have nobody else around. Having one all to myself was always great, and so when I found this spot a few years ago, it sort of became my go-to camping area. The first 3 days of this trip were completely unnoteworthy. Nothing happened. I just camped and enjoyed having an empty lake to myself, spending the days wandering the woods, swimming in the water, and relaxing to the peace and quiet. I felt very safe and saw nothing to make me feel otherwise. It was on the 4th day, though, that I woke up at sunrise and exited my tent to find scattered footprints all over my campsite. Not just in the area around it, but some going right up to the front of my tent. They weren't there before, and it wasn't from me. The prints were from heavy boots, which I didn't even have, and they clearly came by while I was sleeping. I instantly felt really uncomfortable, knowing I had some sort of visitor in the middle of the night. I spent that whole morning walking the area, both through the forest and around the lake, looking for any other signs of anyone around. I didn't find anything. It wasn't really the fact that someone else arrived here that I was so concerned about. It was that they arrived in the middle of the night and walked all around the area I'd clearly been set up at, even coming right up to my tent, which was just insanely creepy. Then they just left without any traces, not even camping around here. It just didn't add up. I kept my eyes open for the rest of the day. Leaving did cross my mind, but the last thing I wanted to do was cut my final camping trip of the year short, and I saw no signs of whoever it was still being around. Looked like he really did just show up and then leave. Maybe he was hoping the spot would be empty and didn't want to share the lake with anyone else. Anyway, the day went by pretty slowly. I hung around the campsite, not doing too much. When the sun set, I stayed by the campfire and waited for myself to get tired. I'd mostly calmed down about the situation. I still thought it was weird and almost unexplainable, but continuing to think about it would only make me more unsettled, and I would never get any answers anyway. The night was pretty quiet. The water moving in the lake, the campfire, and the wind made it hard not to feel relaxed. I settled in my chair and slumped back, cozied up inside my winter jacket. My eyes were starting to get heavy, but I didn't want to get up, so I just let myself fall half asleep in the chair. I say half asleep because I don't think I ever actually fell asleep fully. My eyes were closed and everything, but I still think I was mostly conscious. And then I heard it. A voice call out my name. My eyes shot open, and I sat frozen for a moment. I whipped my head around in all directions. The forest was quiet, and everything seemed to be just as it was before. My eyes were still wide open, and my heart was racing. I couldn't tell if it was just a quick dream or something, or if I'd actually heard someone call my name out. It seemed so ridiculous and impossible that there was no way, but it felt so real. After a minute, I called out hello and listened to my voice echo through the woods with no response. I guess it really was just a quick dream, or maybe even one of those sleep paralysis type hallucinations because of the half-asleep state I was in. That's how I tried to reassure myself. My heart immediately racing like that got me wide awake though, and that feeling of unsettledness still lingered. I couldn't get rid of it. I must have sat there for another half hour until I felt my eyes getting a bit heavy again. But this time, before I even closed them, or was even near falling asleep, I heard it again. A voice calling out my name from the darkness of the woods. The voice I didn't recognize, but the way he said my name was like he was asking for my help, or wanting me to come out there. I stood up and stared out at the woods. His voice called out my name again. It sounded like he wasn't that far away. Obviously, my head was spinning. How did this random guy in the woods know my name? And what was he doing out there in the dark? I took a few steps toward the trees and out to the edge of the light, then reluctantly called out hello again. There was a quiet pause for 15 seconds before the response I got was just the guy calling out my name for a fourth time. Something felt really wrong here. The way he was trying to lure me into walking out there into the woods, where it was legitimately pitch black. No way I was following his voice, no matter how curious and tempted I was to get answers. I took a few steps back and started to pack my things. I wasn't packing all that fast though, because I was constantly stopping to listen and check my surroundings. Not to mention the campfire was just glowing ashes at this point, so taking everything down in the dark wasn't all that easy. It felt like I was running out of time though. The voice kept getting closer as the light from the campfire faded, and several times footsteps would crunch on the leaves not too far away. Whoever was out there had to know what they were doing, which was horrifying. When I finally had everything packed, I threw on my backpack and took out the flashlight. I debated whether or not to turn it on, but decided it might be best to leave it off and try to disappear in the woods, letting the darkness give me enough cover to get away from him and ensure he couldn't follow me. So I left it off and quickly hurried in the opposite direction of the voice. The man called out again as I was leaving, and I only turned back once I was further away. I could barely see the warm glow of the embers from the campfire, and standing just behind it was the faintest outline of a figure. Couldn't make out anything distinct, although something about him looked extremely uncanny, or just off in some way. I turned around and hurried deeper into the woods, hearing the man's voice call out my name one more time, before it was suddenly just me in the empty, quiet, and dark woods again. The hike out of there was nerve-wracking to say the least, but the relief of making it out and getting back to my car and away from those woods, I can't even describe. I thought about calling the cops, but honestly thought I'd sound crazy. Some guy calling out my name in the woods and I guess stalking me. Like, what would cops even do about that? So now, almost 3 years later, I still don't know what truly happened out there that night. I know it's insane, but a part of me is upset that I didn't walk closer toward the voice to try and find out who it was, or how they knew my name. I know if I had, though, it could have been the last decision I'd ever make. I prefer to remain anonymous, but this happened several years ago. I worked at a small standalone business, and one of my coworkers was a guy named Cameron. We connected right away, both having been hired around the same time, and our desks were right next to each other. So needless to say, we talked a lot and had a great work friendship. We never hung out outside of work, but we always joked about going on a camping trip together, since we were both into hiking and stuff, and often found ourselves talking about it during the workday. I never thought it was really gonna happen though, until one day I went into work and his desk was cleared out, and Cameron wasn't there. Turned out he'd been fired, for reasons I of course wasn't permitted to know. I got a text from him that same day, asking about meeting up outside of work and going on that camping trip we always talked about. Honestly, I felt bad for him, and knowing now that I'd likely never see him again if I didn't, I took him up on the offer. I mean, how bad could it be? We made the plans, and a week later we met up at a forest trailhead 2 hours west of the city. He looked very excited and happy to see me, and I was actually happy to see him as well. Right off the bat though, I did feel like he wasn't the same person as he was in the office. Not in a concerning way, but it was just something I noticed. We started heading down the trail and talked the whole way there. I tried subtly asking about why he didn't work at the office anymore, but he avoided the question. At work, he was always very open about everything, probably too open, so it was kind of strange to see him more reserved like this. But I assumed he just made an embarrassing mistake or something. Anyway, we got to the campsite and set up both tents, then made lunch. And as soon as we were done eating, Cameron abruptly stood up and said, "Be right back," then walked off into the woods. The way he said it was like he had somewhere to be, which in this setting didn't make any sense. Like, why not just say you were heading out for a walk or whatever? I stayed at the campsite, relaxing for 10 minutes until he came back. He didn't say anything and acted like nothing happened, so I just let it go over my head. We talked for a bit longer, I don't know, an hour I guess. Then he did the same thing. He said he'd be back and walked out into the woods, except this time it was right in the middle of a conversation. He suddenly just looked out at the trees, stopped talking, and left. First thing I did was look where he had looked, but didn't see anything. This time I actually felt really weird about it, unsettled almost. Again, 10 minutes later, he came back. This time I asked where he went, and he thought for a second, but just said nowhere. No explanation whatsoever. And again, I just let it go. I'd been talking to Cameron nearly every day for 6 months straight, so a few strange things weren't going to fully change my view of him. We talked some more around the campfire, and eventually went into our tents to go to bed. I was pretty tired, so I fell asleep no problem. However, I woke up in the middle of the night. My eyes opened, and I distinctly remember how quiet it was. Just the soft forest sounds. I unzipped my tent and looked out, just to check the surroundings, still not knowing why I woke up. Right away, I saw Cameron's tent was open, and he wasn't in it. I looked all around the campsite and didn't see him anywhere. I noticed the flashlight was missing though, but I didn't see a light anywhere in the trees. Cameron? I called out his name a few times, but he didn't call back. I sat outside my tent for a whole minute, looking all around and waiting to see if he came back, until I started to hear something out in the trees. It sounded like chatter, two people talking quietly back and forth. Cameron, you out there? The talking stopped and the forest was quiet again. After 30 seconds of tension, Cameron slowly walked out of the trees and into the campsite. His face was tense, but he tried to hide it with a nervous smile. I asked him who was out there. He paused, then said no one. As he was talking though, a few footsteps came from out in the trees. I know he heard it too. I looked at him again, and again asked who was out there. I was starting to get really uneasy. But even still, he said no one. There was a very tense 15 or 20 seconds where both of us just looked at each other. And quietly, slow footsteps were approaching from the dark. Adrenaline built up in me until I suddenly just bolted down the trail, leaving everything behind. As I ran, I could hear Cameron and some other guy talking, but I never looked back. I didn't stop until I was at my car. Thank God we drove separately, and I kept my keys and phone on me. I drove home and spent the rest of that night just thinking about what the hell went wrong. I ended up texting Cameron, but the message didn't even deliver. He'd already blocked me. Since that night, I'd never had any contact with him. I don't know who else was out there, or what him and Cameron were planning, but I think I'm really lucky to have gotten away. Last year, just around early November, I took a trip out to my hometown, mostly to see some old friends, but also to enjoy the week in a nice vacation cabin, just a nice rental place in the woods. My hometown wasn't big and mostly surrounded by forest, with plenty of great views and camping areas nearby. I had actually never been camping before, but I'd been doing tons of research and really wanted to get into it. I'd collected all the gear I needed and figured a great first time camping would be in a forest I was familiar with, right outside of my hometown. That way I felt safer and could ease into the hobby. I chose the rental cabin specifically because there was a trail behind it that led to a small campground. I thought if anything went wrong, I could just head back to the cabin and everything would be alright. Felt like a risk-free way to enjoy my first trip. I spent the first couple days hanging out with my friends, and an additional day just chilling at the cabin and prepping my gear. Then I finally headed out to the campground. The trail was only an hour long. For the first 10 minutes, I was more focused on getting my backpack adjusted the right way and making sure everything was just going as planned. Once I got it all situated and had nothing else to worry about, I started to get a strange feeling. The feeling of being watched from out in the trees. It was my first time being alone in a forest, so I thought I was just nervous, but the feeling really didn't go away like I thought it would. Every time I'd look out at the woods past the trail, this hollow, awful feeling would come over me. It really did feel like a sign to get the hell out of there. But I didn't listen. I kept going, fighting those feelings all the way up to the campsite. The campsite wasn't much, just a small bit of land that I honestly wouldn't have thought was even a campsite, if not for a few scraps left around by previous campers. This place definitely wasn't very established because it was unkempt and not maintained at all. Still, being off the trail and in a more open area made me feel a bit better. I felt okay about it enough to stay. I started unpacking and getting my tent set up. This was my first time, so I was following the step-by-step instructions and making sure I got it right. Took maybe 15 minutes, which I don't think was too bad. It was as I was putting the final rain cover over it that a man arrived at the campsite. He was tall and looked around my age, so mid-20s. When I looked over at him, he waved and gave a strange smile. Strange because he made a regular smile, except the rest of his face didn't move. Like he just smiled with his mouth and teeth, while having a blank face. I thought it was really weird, and some crazy coincidence that he showed up right after I did, to a campsite that didn't seem to be used very often. But what did I know? I continued to mind my own business and get everything all sorted in my area, taking everything out and gathering sticks to build a fire with. There was already a small fire ring that someone must have built forever ago. As I was doing all that, the man set up his own tent, not too far from me. But oddly, that was it. That was all he brought. I saw him walk up with a backpack, which I thought was an actual backpack, but it was just a sling bag that had the tent in it. He didn't even have a sleeping bag, or food, or anything at all. I know that for a fact, because his tent was mostly a mesh see-through, not even having a rain cover over it. And the man was just sitting there, doing nothing. I felt weird every time I happened to glance over, because he would immediately look at me, and I'd have to quickly look away. After gathering all the sticks and finally having a while to just sit there and do nothing, I couldn't help but get more and more creeped out by this guy. Just a gut feeling that something was really off about him. And with the sun starting to go down, the thought of being there alone with him at night was really starting to bother me. As much as I hated myself for it, I decided it wasn't worth staying here while I felt this way, especially with my rental cabin not too far. Might even be able to make it before the sun was fully down. I started packing, and the man immediately got out of his tent. He stood next to it, and while he tried to not make it obvious, it was very obvious that he was watching me. His smile was gone now, and his whole face was straight and almost annoyed. I didn't even bother organizing my backpack, throwing everything in and just hoping it would zip up. When I was finally ready to leave, sunlight was just poking out from the top of the trees, so I knew I had to hurry. But the man hadn't taken down his tent, so I hoped that meant he was staying. I started walking. I kept checking behind me, making sure he didn't follow. For the first few minutes, I was relieved to see an empty trail every time I looked back. But about 10 minutes in, I turned around again and saw him. The trail wasn't perfectly straight, but far back, I saw him through the trees, coming down the trail toward me. I felt myself go numb. I was horrified. I picked up the pace, moving faster down the trail. From what I could see, I don't think he knew that I saw him, and the sun going down actually made things better for me. I was able to get back to the rental cabin, throwing my bag down inside and locking every door. I then posted up at the back window for 15 minutes, staring at the woods as the sun fully set and it became dark and lifeless. And it was as I was still staring out the window that a sudden knock shook the front door behind me. Not just some casual knock, though. Over and over, he was banging his fist against the door. In a panic, I called the police. I genuinely couldn't tell if he was just knocking really hard or actually trying to break the door down, and I was too scared to even look. As soon as I started talking on the phone, the man stopped for a second. I knew he was listening. Then his footsteps ran around the cabin, and I'm pretty sure I heard a few thumps from him trying to open up one of the windows, before his footsteps fled into the woods. After that, it stayed quiet until 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later. With everything I told them, the officers agreed the man seemed to have some really bad intentions. However, finding him wasn't so easy. I knew what he looked like, but that was about it. They did a quick search that night with flashlights, but they never found him. His tent was gone from the campsite as well. I truly don't know what could have happened that night. I still can't forgive myself for not listening to my gut right away. It would have prevented everything that happened that night. I should have listened to my gut the moment I started feeling off about that forest.
The bowling alley on Route 9 was the kind of place nobody went unless they were broke or bored. You know, that place with appealing wallpaper, flickering neon lights, and shoes that smelled like decades of feet. But it was cheap, which is why Rachel, Tommy, and I crashed there almost every Friday night during sophomore year. That's where I met this weird dude. He was always there when we arrived, in lane 7, no matter what time we showed up. He'd bowl a few frames, then spend most of his time walking around, pretending to look for his ball or check the scoring screen. But I could feel his eyes on me. The man was tall, maybe in his mid-40s, with thinning hair slicked back with too much gel. He wore the same gray windbreaker every time. "That guy gives me the creeps," Rachel said one night, nodding toward lane 7. Tommy suggested that he was just some lonely dude that we should ignore. But ignoring him got harder when he started choosing lanes closer to ours. From lane 9, he went to lane 5, and then to lane 3. And he'd stand there between his turns, hands in his pockets, watching us bowl. One Friday night in November, he took lane 2, the one right next to us. Rachel and I exchanged looks but didn't say anything. Tommy rolled his eyes and grabbed his ball. The man bowled his first frame, then walked over to our ball return and just stood there like he had every right to be in our space. "Nice form," he said, looking at me. His voice was gentle, and that worsened it. "Thanks," I muttered and tried to brush him off. "You're dropping your shoulder, though. Here, let me show you." Before I could respond, he stepped behind me. His hand touched my elbow, adjusting my arm. His other hand pressed against my lower back. Every muscle in my body went rigid. His hands were cold through my shirt. He smelled like cigarettes and something that made my stomach turn. "There, feel the difference?" He cooed in my ear. I jerked away, told him I was good, and grabbed Rachel's arm to leave. He flashed me a smile that said he knew exactly how uncomfortable he'd made me, and enjoyed it. "See you next week." I heard his chuckle behind us. We left without finishing our game, drove to the diner on Main Street, sat in a booth, and pretended none of it had ever happened. Around 10, Rachel's mom picked her up, so Tommy drove me home since my house was on his way. He dropped me off at the curb, and I watched his taillights disappear down the street before walking up my driveway. My mom's car wasn't there. She was working the night shift at the hospital. I'd forgotten my key that morning, so I had to use the spare we kept in the ceramic frog by the back porch. The motion sensor light clicked on as I walked around the side of the house. I found the frog, grabbed the key, and headed for the back door. That's when I heard running footsteps behind me. I spun around, and there he was, still in his gray windbreaker, his slicked back hair caught in the porch light. He was 10 feet away, then 5 feet, and finally 3 feet away from me. I screamed and lunged for the door, jamming the key in the lock. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn them. He reached me just as the lock clicked. His hand grabbed my shoulder, fingers dug in hard enough to bruise as I threw my weight against the door, and it flew open. I stumbled inside, tried to slam it shut, but he shoved his foot in the gap. "Wait," he panted. "I just want to talk." I screamed louder and kicked at his foot. He pulled back just for a second, and I slammed the door, twisted the deadbolt, and backed away. He pounded on the door. "Maya, I swear I just want to be friends." How did he know my name? I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife from the block, and pulled out my phone with my shaking hands as I dialed 911. The pounding stopped. I stood there in the dark kitchen listening to his movements. Knife in one hand, phone in the other. The house was silent except for my ragged breath. The operator stayed on the line until the police arrived 8 minutes later. They searched the yard, the street, and the neighbors' properties, but there wasn't any gray windbreaker, or slicked back hair, or an SUV parked nearby. Instead, they found the deep impressions of footprints in the soft dirt beneath my bedroom window, like someone had stood there. They also found fresh scratches on the window screen. The officer took my statement and took photos of the footprints and damaged screen. The officer asked if I knew anyone who might want to hurt me. I told them all about the bowling alley and the guy. They said they'd follow up, check the security footage. 2 days later, they called back. The bowling alley owner refused to hand over the footage, quoting some company policy that forbade entertaining such requests without a warrant. And since no actual crime occurred on his property, he wasn't cooperating. The case went cold. We stopped going back to that bowling alley. But 3 weeks later, I saw him again. I was walking home from school, taking my usual route down Maple Street, when a gray SUV rolled past me slowly. The passenger window rolled down. He leaned across the center, flashing that smile. "Need a ride, Maya?" I ran without looking back and didn't slow down until I reached the gas station on the corner, where there were always people and cameras and witnesses. The SUV didn't follow, but his shameless laughter did. My mom suggested we file a restraining order, but you need a name and an address for that. We had neither. That was 4 years ago. I'm in college now, 3 states away. I don't bowl anymore. I can't stand the sounds of pins crashing, or the smell of lane wax, or the sight of gray SUVs. The dude has ruined it all for me. Senior year, my friends and I got into urban exploration. We'd break into abandoned hospitals and close down schools. We just loved the thrill of being somewhere we weren't supposed to be. Derek worked part-time at Sunset Lanes those days. It was this run-down bowling alley on the edge of town, a total ghost except for league nights, when a handful of regulars would shuffle in. One Saturday, Derek mentioned the owner was thinking of selling it. Somebody had bid good money on the relic, and the dude was tired of having to keep patching it up. Marcus immediately suggested we check it out before it was gone forever. Derek protested, worried about getting fired. But Lily pointed out that he was quitting in 2 weeks anyway. She asked when else we'd get the chance to explore a bowling alley at night. Derek had swiped the spare key from the office the day before, and that's how we ended up there at 2 a.m. that Tuesday. Inside, the alley felt different at night. The overhead lights were off except for the glow of emergency exits and the faint shine from the scoring monitors. Our footsteps echoed weird in the empty space. Marcus immediately ran down lane 3, sliding on his knees while Lily started snapping photos of everything. "Relax, dude," I told Derek when I saw him checking his phone for the third time. We messed around for maybe 20 minutes, threw a few balls, and explored the snack bars. Suddenly, Lily called out from the back hallway saying she spotted a funky door. We followed her voice past the restrooms, through a narrow corridor that led to storage. The door was metal, painted the same ugly beige as the walls. The sign read, "Maintenance, authorized personnel only." Marcus kicked the door open. The room beyond was packed with old equipment, broken pin setters, and stacks of worn shoes. We spent the next 5 minutes exploring the room. It was a usual maintenance room, packed with boring-looking cardboard boxes. Marcus kicked one, and suddenly a loud thump echoed from below us. All of us froze. I asked Derek if there was a basement he knew about. Derek shook his head. Before we could figure anything out, another thump made us jump. It felt closer this time. Marcus started moving boxes, suddenly focused. Behind a stack of old score sheets, he found a handle set flush into the floor. It was partially hidden under a grimy rubber mat. We breathed out in disbelief. There was a basement. Derek backed toward the door, saying we should leave. But Marcus was already pulling the hatch open. We waited with hitched breath as metal groaned against metal and cold air rushed up, carrying the sour smell with it. The ladder below disappeared into darkness. Marcus announced he was going down. I told him it was a bad idea. He ignored me, already climbing down. Lily followed him. I looked at Derek, who was pale and shaking his head. Then I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The basement was bigger than I expected, with a low ceiling, a concrete floor, and metal shelving units lining the walls. Everything was covered in thick dust, like nobody had been down there in decades. Boxes were stacked everywhere, most of them water damaged and falling apart. Lily asked why they would hide this like that. We got the answer by a slow, raspy grumble that came from deeper in the basement. My light swept across the space and caught a door at the far end. It was slightly open. The grumbles were coming from behind it. Marcus moved toward the door. "Dude, we need to leave right now," I said, grabbing his arm, but he shook me off. He said there was someone down here who might need help and pushed the door open. My light found the corner of the room, and I saw the man, or what used to be a man. He was crouched in the corner, naked except for filthy rags tied around his waist. His hair was long and matted. His skin was covered in sores and grime, and he was rocking back and forth, muttering something under his breath. When my light hit his face, his movements halted mid-motion, and he stared at us with eyes that were too wide and white, like he'd been in the dark for so long he couldn't process light anymore. In seconds, it came crawling at us on all fours, moving faster than anything that size should. The sound it made wasn't human. Lily screamed. Marcus shoved her toward the ladder. I bolted. Behind us, I could hear it coming. Could hear the nails scraping against the concrete. Derek was already on the ladder, scrambling up. Lily went next, then Marcus. I was the last. As I grabbed the first rung, his cold fingers caught my ankle. He was impossibly strong. I kicked backward aimlessly. One of them might have connected with his skull. The grip released, and I hauled myself up. We slammed the hatch closed. Marcus and I dragged a filing cabinet over it while it pounded from below. The metal hatch jumped with each impact. We ran and didn't stop until we were at Marcus's car, doors locked and engine running. Nobody spoke on the drive back. Derek was crying silently. Lily kept wiping her hands on her jeans like she was trying to clean something off of them. I called in an anonymous tip to the police the next morning. Told them I'd heard screaming from the bowling alley. They investigated but found nothing. The owner said there was no basement, and when they checked, the hatch had vanished, sealed over with fresh concrete. Derek quit without notice the next day. He didn't even go back for his last paycheck. We never talked about what happened, but sometimes I wonder if that thing is still down there, waiting in the dark, starving and shivering. Amanda and I had been living together for 6 months when it happened. The house was old, built in the 1940s, but the rent was cheap and the neighborhood was quiet. We loved it. That Friday night in July, we'd planned to go bowling. Amanda had been talking about it all week. She wanted to blow off steam after a brutal work week. We got to the alley around 8, got our shoes, and picked our lane. Amanda was having fun until he walked in. I had never seen her face change color like that before. She was pale as a ghost, and her whole body went rigid. "We should go," she said quietly. "What? We just got here." "Tyler, please. I want to leave." I followed her eyes and saw him. He was tall, gym rat build, and already staring at our lane with this expression I couldn't read. Amanda grabbed her purse and was already walking to the door. In the parking lot, she finally told me everything about the abusive relationship with Mike. The restraining order had expired 3 months ago. He'd shown up at her work twice since then. Never did anything, just watched her from across the street. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I asked. She didn't answer. We drove home in silence. I could tell she was rattled by the way she kept checking the side mirror like she expected to see his truck following us. At home, I opened a bottle of wine and tried to salvage the evening. We ended up playing Wii bowling in the living room instead. After her third glass, Amanda finally started laughing again. I thought we had put the whole thing behind us. But around 11, a heavy thud from upstairs jolted us awake. I checked both bedrooms, the bathroom, and the spare room we used for storage. Everything looked normal. The windows were closed. "Probably the stray cat," I called down to Amanda. We went to bed again. Amanda fell asleep almost immediately, curled against my side. I was almost out when I heard the thud again. It was heavier this time, and it came from the attic. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and pulled on a t-shirt. In the hallway, I stood beneath the attic access hatch, listening. The steady creaking sound continued. I pulled down the ladder as quietly as I could. It extended with a soft screech of metal. I climbed slowly, letting the phone's flashlight cut through the darkness above. The attic was hot and dusty. Insulation was visible between the rafters. The boxes we'd stored when we moved there were stacked along one side. At the far end, near the small circular window, a chair rocked. One we definitely didn't own. The flashlight hit him, and he stopped rocking. Just froze mid-motion with his back to me. He was wearing dark clothes and a jacket despite the heat. His head was tilted at a strange angle. "Who the hell are you?" My voice came out shakier than I wanted. He didn't answer. "This is my house. You need to leave now." That's when he started laughing in a way that made my blood run cold, because I'd heard that before. At the bowling alley, from across the parking lot, when Amanda had grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the car. He stood up slowly, still facing away from me. "Get out or I'm calling 911. I put on a brave face, but I was already backing toward the ladder. Mike turned around. His face was pale and slick with sweat. His eyes were too wide, and his mouth was twisted between a smile and a grimace. He looked wilder and unhinged, the version Amanda had warned me about. As he stepped closer, one step at a time, I dropped down through the hatch faster than I'd climbed up. I nearly fell down the ladder, but I managed to grab the cord and slam the hatch closed just as his footsteps reached it. He hit the hatch from above. Each impact shook the frame. He kept screaming Amanda's name over and over and claimed that she was his and could never leave him. I braced myself against the ladder, using my weight to keep the hatch closed. My arms were already shaking. "Tyler? What's happening?" Amanda was in the hallway, phone in hand. Then she heard his voice, and her face went white. "Oh my God, that's..." "Call the police now." She dialed, backing toward the bedroom. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. Above us, the pounding continued. The hatch was starting to buckle. Amanda told me that cops would show up in 5 minutes. Those were the longest 5 minutes of my life. My shoulders burned from holding the hatch. He kept hitting it and kept screaming her name. Suddenly, the wood splintered, and his fingers appeared through a crack. They were pale and dirty and reaching for me. But right when his fingertips brushed my hair, sirens wailed outside. The pounding stopped. I could hear him move toward the small window at the other end of the attic. Cops caught him trying to climb out. He was still screaming Amanda's name when they pulled him back through the window and cuffed him. Up close, he looked more hideous. His clothes were filthy. His fingernails were caked with dirt. He stared at me with pure hatred as they walked him past. He promised he'd find her as the officers dragged him. The officers said he'd probably been up there since before we got home. Must have followed us from the bowling alley, watched us go inside, then climbed in while we were downstairs drinking wine. The cops said we were lucky to get out unharmed because they found weapons in his pockets. We moved out 2 weeks later. Amanda couldn't sleep knowing he'd been above us, listening to us panic over him, watching through the cracks of the floorboards, and waiting for the right moment to finish what he had started. She has nightmares now, waking up convinced she can hear that rocking chair creaking above her, still screaming her name, over and over.